Welcome, everyone, to the 18th annual MIT Sloan CIO Symposium and the first digital edition. This is episode 2. Will artificial intelligence get us through uncertain times? I'll remind you that this particular panel is going to be extended to 75 minutes, so stay on for that. If you have questions, please use Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You may chat amongst yourselves, but we won't be monitoring that for questions. If you use social media, use the hashtag MITCIO. And also, if you want to join the discussion in our community, post to the 2021 Symposium program under the topic Future of Work. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Kathleen Kennedy. The Women of the Harvard Club named her one of Boston's most influential women, and I can personally attest to the passion, energy, and thought that she has put into planning this panel. She is the executive director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. Please join me in welcoming Kathleen Kennedy.
Alan, thank you so much, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Now, we're going to have a fantastic discussion today. There's little doubt that the pandemic has accelerated digital transformation, and it's really disrupted everything. So how should you and your company, what should you do? Should you double down on AI and automation to navigate through these uncertain times, as the title of this panel suggests? We'll dig into that. What approaches and technologies and tools hold the most promise for you and your long-term success? We're going to explore different techniques, including collective intelligence, reskilling, and other interesting strategies that can really ensure your long-term success. Now, let's start with some introductions. We've got some really great panelists here that are going to dig into these topics and more. Unfortunately, let me just say at the top that Pedro has come down with a fever, and we're sending our best to him and hoping that he doesn't have COVID. I'd like each of my panelists here to introduce themselves, and I'm going to have them go in alphabetical order by first name. So, Craig, you're first up.
Great. Hello, everyone. Hello, Kathleen. I'm Craig Mackereth, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Support at Rimini Street, based in Dallas, Texas. I run a team of engineers in 17 countries dedicated to providing 24/7 global support to our clients in Oracle, SAP, ERP systems, and technology like databases and middleware. We've used AI in our organization and look forward to the discussion today.
Great. Thank you, Craig. Gianni, you're up next.
Hey, Gianni, Giacomelli, based in Berlin. I have the responsibility of leading our innovation efforts at Genpact. Genpact is a service provider focused on digital transformation of large operations, about 100,000 of us across the world. And I also spent time at the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence, where I am head of innovation design at the Design Lab.
Great, Gianni, thank you. And Ricardo.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hello, everyone from Madrid, Spain. This is Ricardo Forcano. I've been 20 years in the corporate world, the last 10 years at BBVA, an international bank based in Spain, but with presence in Europe, Latin America, the US, Turkey, and so on. At BBVA, I've played different roles. For the last years, I was the CIO of the bank, leading technology and operations. Previous to that, I was the CHRO, leading human resources across the group. And before that, I was in charge of business development in growth markets in Mexico, Turkey, and Latin America. The news is that I left the bank at the end of last year. I'm now starting a new stage, mainly dedicated to academic research, also lecturing, and also advising some technology companies here in Europe. So glad to participate.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And Ricardo, welcome to the world of academia. I'm Kathleen Kennedy, as Alan said, and I have been at MIT for actually the last couple decades. And right now, I'm wearing two hats. As Alan had said, I'm the executive director for the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. And in addition to that, I am the senior director for what's called MIT Horizon. is a learning platform that is at MIT Open Learning, and it's a learning platform for training at scale. And we cover emerging technologies for large organizations that need to transform their workforce. So I am really excited about this conversation. As Alan also said, if you can actually use the Q&A functionality on Zoom, I'm going to monitor those questions. Thomas Hart, I see that you already submitted a great one on the chat, and I note that, and I will weave that into this conversation. But others, if you could use that Q&A functionality so that I can keep track of them all. I've got a lot of questions myself, and we're going to go ahead and dig in. So first up, I wonder, Craig, if you can start off with this one, and then others chime in as you see fit. Craig, how did you see the pandemic change your company? And then what do you think the lasting impact of the pandemic will be?
Yeah, and I acknowledge Thomas's question as well. I think I can weave in an answer there. So, we started with a huge advantage at the beginning of the pandemic because our team is already mostly remote. So we just had a small percentage of engineers, some in California, India, and Japan that were working out of offices. But most people were remote already, and we had been running a remote workforce for 15 years. Biggest change for us day to day was travel. So many of us, myself included, were on the road all the time, meeting with clients, in-person meetings all the time with our engineers. It's been about a year without that. But it turns out that we're now more busy than ever, and I can spend more time I can spend less time in airports trying to find healthy food, and more time at home where I get lots of healthy food delivered to me right here. So I need to kind of, have that in moderation. Lasting impact, I think clients rethinking priorities. And I think this kind of weaves in the question from Thomas. I think people are rethinking what are the top priorities for us. It's really challenging the normal way of doing business. We've got many clients in retail and manufacturing. For them, life has changed forever. The way of working has forever changed. You need to be able to deliver things differently. You need to have different thoughts of the way the supply chain would work. But I think for everyone, for many, many customers, it's really brought focus as to what is important, not only in business, but in their lives, and to deliver what matters most to employees and their clients.
Yeah, if I may jump in, Kathleen, in our case, it has impacted the bank in many dimensions, actually, but I will pick just three of them. I think the first one, it was a very important validation for the strategy of the bank over the last many years, right? In our case, we were first movers in this digital transformation in banking as far as 2008, 2009. So we have been investing in technological and digital transformation, investing in talent for this cultural transformation, organizational change, and so on for many years. It started to pay off over the last 3-4 years, but this pandemic effect has clearly accelerated this process. So I think it has been a way for us to show the strengths we have been building for the last decade in the bank, right? Second, the biggest impact was that when all this started, we were very clear that our number one priority was the health of our employees and our customers, right? For that to be true, we made a huge effort in order to move all our employees working remotely in a period of just 10-15 days in every country in the world. We are present in 30 different countries across the globe. This was a huge challenge because many people were already working remotely easily, but other roles like people like traders in the trading room or people working in the call centers and the operation centers, it was really a complex process of setting up new infrastructure, developing new security solutions for them to be able to work, having access to the same tools and software they were using before, but from home. So I think it was in a way a very interesting process for us to see that when you are under pressure and you have to respond to a huge challenge like this, you can achieve things that were really unimaginable for us a few weeks before that. And then I think the lasting impact is how the bank is transforming the working model into a hybrid model. Because before the pandemic, our model was mainly an on-site model, right? Most of the people were basically working at the office. And now we are still, the bank is still in the discussion of the new model, but it is very clear already that it's going to be a hybrid model. So my view also is that the extremes may work for some companies, but generally speaking, I think the strengths are not good, either being all the time at the office or all the time working remotely. I think every company has to find the right equilibrium, in which I think typically it has to be the teams themselves, not a top-down strategy setting, the rules that you have to go on Tuesday and Thursday and you on Wednesday and Wednesday, which makes no much sense. But the teams understanding what are the dynamics, the nature of the work they are doing and so on, to select which meetings, ceremonies have value to have them in person versus other ones that can be very easily managed remotely. So I think that's an interesting process that is going to define how this is going to play in the coming months.
No, brilliant. I wish we had a voting functionality, because I'd be so curious where people are coming down on that point that you brought up of, do you come all the way back and what level is right? Gianni, we want to pick up on and just what you think about these points real quick.
I think the work that we do really covers pretty much large organizations. So I would echo what Ricardo and Craig just said. The one thing, though, that I think is coming out really strongly, and this is a little bit of using our MIT lens of network analysis, is that at the end of the day, organizations are cohesive entities based on a federative culture. And that culture requires a certain amount of cohesiveness of people and people being together. When you get people working from home, you can get it done functionally. But emotionally, there's a risk that people feel disconnected from the actual lifeblood of the energy of the organization. And from an innovation standpoint, the issue is that those weak ties that are created in the serendipitous encounters at the water cooler, for example, not just they're not just important for cultural cohesiveness, but they're also important for just crafting ideas that are a little bit of a hybrid between other people's ideas. And so the risk is, Ricardo was talking about the hybrid. If we don't design the organization of the future well, we might actually be able to do functionally things very well in the short term, but we may ossify the culture and the ability of creativity, really, that sparks from those encounters. This is not destiny, by the way. I think as long as we understand that those weak ties in the organization are important, then we can put practices, technologies, and methods in place to actually make the most of a situation where now, the upside is, I have somebody in the East Coast and I have somebody in Japan. They literally, their space still looks like the same Square, Zoom, or Microsoft Teams, right? So I can get them to work in a way that it wasn't possible before.
Couldn't agree more. And actually, that links to some work that we're doing at the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. We are building a new design methodology that is called Superminds Design. And it's the idea of how do we need to systematically create those new systems of people and machines working together. And in fact, this background is not just a beautiful piece of art, but is the design and the brand that we've built around that Superminds design methodology. And because exactly that, you need to connect with people, I think, emotionally as well. And so let's see, I want to kick it over to Craig now, and let's go deeper into AI. We'll come back to this idea around collective intelligence, but I want to get into the sort of the nuts and bolts around AI, because that's like the topic, burning topic of this panel. How do you use AI in your company today? And what are the standards in your industry? Give me where we are now.
Sure. So a little bit about the business. When clients call us for support, we guarantee we'll respond very rapidly, and we wanted to connect and engineer with the customer very, very quickly. In fact, we benchmark ourselves against emergency services rather than against our competition here. So, we look at, how rapidly the police or fire, respond to something. So it's about 2 minutes response time on average, and then an experienced engineer is talking. After that point, we can then bring AI in, because what we want to do then is to connect what could be a massive number of different modules and customers and industries and so many potential incoming queries with the best possible engineer. And whether that's the right mix of product knowledge or availability or security clearance or client satisfaction rating or spoken language, we want to make sure that we pair those two just as quickly as we can. And what used to take us 20, 30 minutes to do as a manual process and very thoughtfully weighing up the pros and cons, we can now do in a few seconds using AI. So that's how we're using it day to day, in the weeds, every single day, and threading it into something that happens constantly. In the industry, that's a really interesting question, and one I think that is quite interesting as a debate topic, really. That even though we're in IT, we're really in the customer service industry, and I think a lot of people really are. In the customer service industry, there's a big question. Do you use AI and technology to bring people closer, or do you use AI to deflect away and to say, you don't need to talk to an engineer to get this answer. You can go to these locations and here's the answers that we've written for you. Go ahead and do what we would call self-support. And so it's really a transformation and a moment in time where different organizations are really choosing which way they're going to go. Are we going to deflect this into this kind of opportunity to connect with people further away and leave people interacting more with machines, or potentially use machines to simulate human interaction so they don't even know that they're still working with machines, or they haven't reached out to people, or to use them, which we believe in, to bring people closer together, even though they may be remote, bring them closer together and have more of that human interaction, which I firmly believe drives very high client satisfaction. So, that's where we're putting our bet in that race.
Awesome, Craig. Ricardo, you want to talk to us about what you were doing at the bank?
Sure. I think in the banking industry, data and AI has been a relevant trend over the last 5, 6, or even 7 years, right? Banking and financial services is mainly a data business, whereas managing data all the time. So it means that banks, BBVA in particular, have invested a lot over the last years in developing new technologies, acquiring talent, investing on this. Applications are multiple, right? Like just to give some examples, risk scoring, that is at the center of the business of banking intermediation, has been traditionally based in modeling. So this is just a new wave of modeling based on AI, machine learning, deep learning techniques. Personal finance management tools that are more and more relevant as a way to connect with our customers through digital channels and mobile apps and so on. In a way, you could see banking in the past as a business that was based in having a product distribution machinery based on a branch network that was very capillary and run by commercial campaigns based on customer segmentation, right? And the transformation we are going to is exactly the opposite. Rather than having customer segments, we want to have the segment of one. How we are able to attend the needs, not only to sell products, but particularly to provide good financial advice to the segment of one. And the only way you can do that, to have that kind of personalized advice when you have millions of customers, as we had in BBVA, is by automating it using AI tools, right? So I think that's a very important area in the way banks connect with customers, attend their needs, and so on. And then also in everything related to fraud detection, cybersecurity, compliance, it has been very important for many years already to use AI models. So I think all banks are working on this. I think the key challenge is how you move from having a few dozen of cases, interesting cases that you can solve, but many times have actually marginal impact on the balance sheet and the P&L, to transform this into a capability that is truly embedded across the organization, that is at the core of the processes of the bank, or the operations of the bank, right? And I think for that transition to happen, you need to go beyond data science and modeling and neural networks and transformers, which is very cool, but you have to get into what is not so cool and more complex and takes more time. That is all the work of data management, right? Data architecture, data governance, data labeling, because typically you have supervised learning models, and the labeling of data is so important for this to work. and also data security and privacy, right? So I think all these data management streams are really critical for this to have a real impact in the bank. And they all require a big effort, a multi-annual effort for this to work.
Awesome. Let's see. We've already got some really great questions from the audience. So thank you, Ricardo, for that. And I think you introduced, there's two questions in the middle, one from Ali and one from Roberto, that I think are super interesting. I want to go into right now. Steve Patterson, I want to acknowledge your question, and we're going to come back to that one when we get a little bit deeper into the collective intelligence discussion. But let's start here with this, and then Thomas, will come back to yours too. Ricardo, you already focused a little bit on this, but the biggest obstacles that a business can face at deploying AI at scale. I want to talk about that. And then in conjunction with that, I love this question from Ali on how do you educate the customer and have them, I would imagine with the bank, you probably dealt with that. And Craig and Gianni, you might have some interesting points on this. How do you educate the customer in thinking about AI products versus, AI in a company and different things around that? That's sort of, I think, really interesting. So, Ricardo, you want to start, and then Gianni and Craig jump in?
Sure. I mean, very good questions. The one from Roberto asking about the biggest obstacles for this to scale. I was already touching on this, right? I think when you get into the core of it, again, that is not just having a few dozens of data scientists playing with models, but truly embedding this into your daily operations, you realize that you have to do all this hard work around data. One of the most difficult areas I've seen in the case of BBVA and banking in general is data governance. Because the problem with data governance, which is different, for example, to data architecture or data security and so on, is that data governance is a function and a role to be played across the whole organization. So it's not something that the people in engineering or technology are going to take good care of, right? It's actually everyone in the organization, every function, every unit, whether it is finance, HR, risk, so on, they have a role to play on this, and they have to define their data taxonomy, and they have to define the people who are going to be the data owners, to be working on data quality, and so on, right? And this new role is a difficult one because people in these areas are not used to take this role, right? And so it's a big transformation that goes beyond technology and data teams across the whole organization. And connected to that, I would say the other obstacle is about learning, right? This is a new technology, but that is going to be so relevant and so at the core of the business because the products of banking are going to be AI products, right? So product development, product design, customer relationship is all going to be at the end about technology and data. So you need everyone to have a minimum level of understanding about this, right? And what you typically found in companies is that there is this big gap between the engineering guys and the rest, right? On one hand, the engineering guys don't want to lose time explaining things to the rest, and then the rest see this as a black box, so complex, and there is so much lingo that is a barrier to enter into that. So one thing we were working in the bank very seriously was in how we close this gap by extending learning communities and platforms we had for the engineering people to the rest of the organization, and how we can make this more accessible to everyone. So everyone has a minimum understanding of what an AI algorithm is, what is machine learning, why data is so relevant, and those basic things that at the end of the day are going to allow you to do a better job in your role when it is connecting to data and AI and so on.
That's fantastic. And I'll tell you that I just had a big kickoff yesterday. MIT Horizon, we are working with a number of groups across MIT on researching, doing education research on how do we educate at scale on AI. And then we've built it with a number of different learning journeys. So some for senior level people that really need to understand it strategically and manage people, that are, operationally doing different things and making decisions, to like highly technical people that need to understand, in great detail. And MIT's got some great tools for that. But then the biggest group is really looking at how do you work in an organization that has AI and it's something that you need to use every day. You're not necessarily building it. You're not necessarily making, senior level strategic decisions, but it's just in your world. And, we've designed a pathway for that. So I think we're right now, we're working with the Air Force and all of the DoD on looking at, how do we need to train our forces at scale? But then we're working with large corporates on doing just that. So it's super interesting and I think a big challenge. Let's see, I want to send this one over to Craig. And Craig, what types of data analytics do you use? And what do our decision makers on this call need to think about when they're evaluating different things?
Yeah, so we use a few different things. We've got a mix of data that we're investigating. Some is structured and some is unstructured. So on the structured data, it's very easy to do that. On the unstructured data, we've been using natural language processing to really understand the sentiment of what people are saying when they're having human-to-human interaction. That's been extremely useful, and it's really helping us to reveal patterns in the data. It allows us to look at and kind of predict what may be happening into the future, which is very, very useful for us. And you can really see the model starting to just get smarter and smarter and give you even more insight. The more data you feed it, the more that you train these systems, the more training you do, the more useful that can become. And I just make one quick comment on the last topic, which is I think we've got to be careful not to get distracted by the buzzword of AI. So, when I was listening to the great recommendations from Ricardo, he was talking about data governance and risk and ownership and the gap between engineers and business. Those problems have always been there. They're there for every IT project. We always face these issues. I think sometimes people focus on, well, it's AI, so everything has to change. Actually, a lot of the things that we've learned from many, many years of other implementations totally apply here. And you have to bear that in mind. Just keep it grounded. Yes, it is new. Yes, there's some very cool cutting edge things here, but it's an IT project. And those same principles that have allowed you to successfully implement IT projects for many years totally apply here. Don't forget those core principles.
Totally. Gianni, Ricardo, you want to build on that before I jump to another topic area? Good.
I think he covered it well. I mean, at the end of the day, it's less about the technology in itself. I mean, and we've been having this problem probably the last 5 years. There's a bunch of low-hanging fruits that a few people can go in and pluck in terms of, for example, automation. Right? I mean, take underwriting in a bank or order management. You can go in and take out part of the process by applying AI that does, for example, uses natural language processing to summarize and classify and expedite the right way certain cases that come into the bank or into the sales organization, the order management organization. That's easy. That's actually fairly easy. It's obviously technically it's not that trivial, but organizationally it's not complicated. What is really complicated is to make AI function for processes that cut across the organization from the front to the middle and the back office. At the end of the day, the client really doesn't care about one little sliver of your process. They care about the loop, right? They ask you something, they get the response. And very often the flow cuts across a bank or a sales organization and an enterprise organization in a way that those systems were never built to do that, right? They were siloed, the data structures weren't seamlessly aligned. And so in this case, it's jumped from one person to the other. So you have people who are the glue of some of the interstitial gaps between the systems. That is the hard part. And that's actually the reason why getting AI to work at scale is more than just a data problem. I mean, it ends up actually exacerbating a data problem, which is a master data problem, which is Ricardo was making the point, is the least sexy of the story, but it's actually the more complex one to tackle because Complexity is just a reflection of the complexity of the organizational system that is behind it. It's actually less of a technology problem.
Oh, yes. Often comes back to the people, right? I think that these two next questions, one from Jose Luis and one from Rubens, sort of tie into what we're talking about right now on how do you measure the ROI for AI in your organization. And Gianni, you touched on that a little bit. And then the second is how are your organizations and other client organizations that you're working with using AI to improve internal operation efficiencies and productivity? And Gianni, I think you were talking a little bit about that. It's cutting across. Guys, want to pick up on these two and riff a little bit?
Maybe I'll just build on what I was talking about before. Look, at the end of the day, AI will be a fantastic tool to eliminate a bunch of work that humans were never meant to do, right? We actually forced, especially in large shared service organizations, we actually forced millions of people across the world to work like machines, right? We hired them as humans, and then the moment they touch the cubicle, we turn them into robots, right? Literally swivel chair kind of stuff. That was never meant to be human work, right? And so we are going to use technologies just to get rid of that. But the next thing that machines can really help us do is to augment people. So take, for example, very often enterprise processes are about risk management, right? You take an order, you take underwriting a bank, those two are, at the end of the day, you need to decide if you want to fulfill that at what price, right? It's actually a risk management thing. The way it works is you have people who are associated with those decisions, right? Typically it's a middle office kind of person. Maybe there's a little bit of an escalation path for the complicated things. Well, those people are people who typically are somewhat senior. They have a lot of experience because, in their mind, they've had a little bit of machine learning in their own brain, right? And over the years, they've figured out that kind of risk is not within the strike zone. I don't want to do it, right? And insurance is actually very common. Well, now you have machines who can actually do that job for these people, right? To some extent, right? And say, I have triaged all these 15 things that you had. This 5 actually look like completely out of your strike zone. Don't even touch it. This 5, I want to have your opinion. And this 5, I actually don't know. So, I give it back to the human. That's the core very often of enterprise processes end to end, right? And that's how you get the operational efficiency. You really remove people from places where the humans were never supposed to be. Now, the ROI question is actually a good one if you think about this scenario. Yeah, part of the ROI is to eliminate the human component from the thing, but really a big part of the ROI is back to the point about the customer. You want the end customer to feel that the experience that they have of you as a counterpart is awesome, right? And the moment you start putting people into little silos, into workflows, it's obvious that you're going to degrade the experience for the user in the front. I mean, if you think about all these new companies that we all cringe at looking at their valuation. I mean, the reality is that they always build this front, middle, and back office as one thing. So meaning that when a client touches one of them, the answer is somewhat immediate, right? When you touch a quote-unquote legacy organization or normal traditional company, the response is only going to be immediate if the front end of that company, so the call center, for example, is able to answer that. The moment that case moves over to another part of the organization, you're in for a ride, right? And as a user, you are going to have a serious degradation of experience. The ROI, most of the ROI is really there, is the ability of service people fast and accurately. And that's where artificial intelligence, if applied well to those processes end to end, will be a complete game changer in the world.
In our case, in the bank, I would say first, I think the ROI up to now has been mainly coming from cost reduction and efficiency more than revenue generation up to date, right? And so this is very connected to the question on operational efficiencies and productivity and so on. And I will see like 3 stages. The first stage is when you develop tools that are useful for people to make a better job in what they are doing, right? Is this augmentation concept that Gianni was describing, and we have many examples of that for people in the call centers, people attending customers remotely, for compliance officers when they are reviewing cases, and so on. Processes that traditionally have been very manual. As soon as you are able to have tools that allow these people to be more effective in the work they are doing and more efficient in the work they are doing, it pays off very fast. Because you free up time, then sometimes you can use that free up of time to reduce costs, reduce the structure, or to invest these people in playing other activities that are more value added to what they were doing before, right? The second one will be to go a bit farther than that. It's not just having tools for humans, but actually automating parts of the process, right? As Gianni was also mentioning before. And we have some examples of that, mainly in the operation center, where we have been introducing both models, AI models and RPA too, in order to automate the specific parts of processes, right? And then the third level, that is probably the really interesting one, but the most difficult to get into, is the extreme automation case, right? How do you can completely redesign a process, right? Because the problem is that typically when we see this opportunity, we take processes as they are, and we find opportunities here and there to, with the same process design, introduce automation elements into it, right? But the other way is just, let's do a complete redesign of the process, having in mind that we now have these tools, that we now have this modeling capacity that we didn't have in the past, right? It's like building something from scratch, right? In the bank, we did some first cases of that, which are more difficult projects, because obviously the work to be done is more complex, not only on the design, but also in the execution and the implementation of it. But then is when you can see a return that is really incredible, right, in what you achieve. So I think those three are the phases I've seen. But I will mention also regarding ROI, I think in technology, when a new technology comes, you cannot be asking the very first day what's the ROI, because if you ask for that, you are going to get nothing to start with. I think it's always, at least in my experience and my view, a combination of having the vision, a strategic vision of this for the nature of it is going to have a big impact in our industry. We have a big opportunity that is more of a strategic vision for the long term than any specific number. To combine that vision with real data when you start playing with it, to have the confirmation with the specific cases that, okay, this expectation we had with the vision is actually coming true when we start playing with it. But I believe it's a bit dangerous when you try to get ROI very fast, because it can take you to reduce the scope of what you do when you are just starting to introduce something new into the organization.
I'll comment on that as well, and I totally agree with what the other panelists have been saying. I think for overall ROI for AI in your organization, totally agree. It's very difficult to measure that return. But I think for projects, I'd take a slightly different tack. I think that there's a lot of focus on ROI when the project business case is being built. You know, what will be that return? But unfortunately, a lot of people leave that there. They leave it just to the business case phase of the project, and they forget all about it. They get into the project and they're in the storm. They're not really thinking about about ROI. Prior life, I spent more than a decade working in the defense sector, and there we had a very distinct focus on ROI, which is the ROI. You need to hold the project team accountable for that return on investment, so that beyond when the initial project delivers, you have the project team held accountable to make sure that return on investment is actually produced. So have the project team define what they think is an achievable ROI, and then hold them accountable for that after you've implemented it. And by doing that, you can really narrow down the focus on the ROI that they're confident that you will achieve. And smaller steps to get there lead to a collective leap forward. So you make incremental steps, and you ultimately will leap forward, which is, it's an agile approach, and it works really, really well, I think, for ROI.
Great. I feel like in this ROI conversation, we've covered also how do you prioritize? There's a couple questions that came in on that. Before we leave that fully, does anyone have comments about, like, with limited resources, how do you prioritize what you're going to start or do?
Cut out everything that isn't going to be paying itself off in the first year. Just cut it loose. It's not worth focusing on, especially now with the pandemic. You really need to have projects return. So if you've got a project that you don't see any return, then it's not on the list. You need to be focused on those that are going to give you a return, and they should bubble right to the top. It shouldn't take too long to figure out what those are going to be. And along the way, in this field, you'll discover so much more. So you need to be walking. You can't be standing still evaluating all the time. You've got to identify projects you think are going to return an investment really, really quickly, get going. And along the way, you'll discover a lot more on that journey.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually. If I think I agree with you on the, you don't want to just scattergun things just because we end up having now a new tool, right? But a little bit what Ricardo was saying before. As an innovation person, I tend to invest 70% of my time and energy on things that do exactly what you said, Greg, right? You have clear deliverables, and you know what they're going to touch, and you know where the process is going to improve, and you know the impact on the bottom line, on the risk reduction, on the client experience, so you can actually talk about that. But you really also want to spend, especially now, if companies have a little bit of the financial muscle, this is actually a good time to separate out from competition, right? And you can spend 20% of your time and money on things that somewhat push the boundary, right? A little bit of what Ricardo was saying. It doesn't need to give you an immediate return on investment, say cost, money in the bank tomorrow, but it builds a capability that you know that you're going to be able to deploy, right? It's something very practical, but doesn't necessarily make you money today, right? So the return on investment is over a longer time horizon. And I still think if you are in a company that has a little bit of financial P&L muscle, or has the ability to maybe acquire because you have a good balance sheet, capabilities from outside, still spend 10% of your investment dollars into, looking into building capabilities that are really future oriented, right? Things that may or may not pan out, but if they pan out, people talk about, we're discussing about Coinbase, people have done well. 5 years ago, they kind of put a little bit of money into that. They've done very well. So there's a little bit of that. Obviously, to Craig's point, if you don't have the resources, you really need to keep the machine chugging along today. Well, you focus on the short term, but this is not a bad time to actually take a few bets into the future.
Yeah, let me, Kathleen, to share a different angle on this, because beyond the criteria for prioritization, as you were discussing, something that to me is very important and very interesting is the governance, the decision-making process, right? This is something that in the bank we invested a lot of time to design. It was in parallel to the agile transformation of the bank. That is an interesting process that over the last 6-7 years, we completely transformed the whole organization, starting with a few scrums in product development, then extending to hundreds of teams across countries, and eventually to the whole organization across all functions, including finance, HR, everything, right? But in parallel to that transformation of the organization and the way of working and the culture and the values and so on, there was this process of setting up a governance model for portfolio management, portfolio prioritization, right? And we ended up building a quarterly process that goes bottom up and top down all the way, right? Meaning that every quarter, the executive committee at the top of the group invests a full day reviewing the whole portfolio. Whole portfolio, it's interesting because the first time we made the inventory of projects across the whole group, it was like, well, it was not across the whole group yet, it was just in product development, it was like 600 projects. Eventually, it became 3,000 projects in different areas, in different countries. So just making that inventory was very interesting because we were not really aware of how many things we were doing across countries, many times initiatives that were overlapping each other and so on, right? And then framing that huge inventory of projects into programs and building up a portfolio and making this more strategic has been a very interesting journey for the bank that has allowed us to have strategic discussions at the very top of the bank to discuss about project prioritization, right? So I think that kind of processes are important because otherwise this is like a very disordered process in which politics are in play, and you don't really know. I mean, I always say that in the past, in the bank, the chairman could say, this is very important. In reality, maybe everything was just inertially moving in the same direction, and nobody was putting more resources seriously into that, because the inertia of how the processes of resource allocation were playing out across areas, across countries, was so complex. And now, thanks to this transformation of the governance model, I think now this is working well.
Awesome. Let's see. We've got 3 meta topics, I'd say, and then a couple specific questions as well. One topic is around data and sort of the quantity and quality of data. 2 is around talent and how do you find talent in sort of this time. And then the 3rd is around ethics. I wonder if we want to jump into maybe the ethics conversation real quick, and then we can do the other ones a little bit sort of more of a speed round, just addressing some of the burning questions. Let's see. This is from Dr. Sumit Agarwal. I wanted to know about the thought process related to AI ethics. How do we address this? What are we doing to make sure the impact is positive? So, Johnny and Ricardo, which one of you want to start?
Yeah, I can start because this is very relevant in banking, as you can imagine. We have been working in different dimensions of it. I would say the first one is privacy, right? Consent management, because that's the first element of it, right? How are you treating your customers regarding the privacy of their data, right? And this is a really complex theme, mainly because it is regulated very differently across countries, right? And for our organizations, as we at BBVA are with presence in many countries across the European Union, but in the States, in Latin America, you have first to really understand what the regulation is saying country by country in terms of consent, data usage, data transfer across countries, because AI models many times doesn't make sense that you decentralize a model across countries. You want to have a central model that you can run to attend the needs of a business unit across countries. But for that to play, you need to move data from one country to another country. And the local regulation for that is also very different. So I think privacy is a very serious element of it. Maybe it's not still ethics if you want, but before ethics, if you don't do the right work in privacy, all of the rest of the discussion is secondary, I think, at least today. But then getting into ethics, in our case, I think the 2 key themes are bias and explainability. Obviously, bias is very clear depending on the data you are using. The model is as good as your data. So if your data is biased, your models are biased. So it's not an easy element to solve. But I think the key thing to start with is to be aware of it and to start playing with the results of your models to identify what may be the biases coming out of them and how they connect with the data you are using for it, right? So just making your teams working in this, aware of this issue and having discussions around it, I think is a good starting point, right? And then explainability, again, in banking is a tough one. Because, for example, the typical example is risk scoring, right? When you are telling a customer that you are denying a loan, a mortgage, how do you explain that to the customer? And my view is here there is a trade-off that is very difficult to solve, right? Because when you use more sophisticated models, the more sophisticated the model, the more difficult for you to explain it. That's the beauty of it, right? If you can, through a logical, rational process, explain it easily to a customer, it's because what the model is providing to you is not so interesting or not so different, right? And so I think some companies are working in innovative ways to find a shortcut for this. I'm not sure it's working well because it's just you try to pretend that you understand the model and explain it, but in reality, you don't understand the model, right? So I think that's probably the toughest one, and in industries like banking is very relevant.
I would say, maybe just building on this, I want to apply the collective intelligence lens to this, right? I mean, at the end of the day, organizations are not one person, right? They're not even a team. They are a collection of people attached to processes with algorithms that make decisions on their own. So, very often it's actually really hard to translate the individual ethics of a person, including the ethics of a programmer, right? Which may or may not be there, at an enterprise level. So the point I'm making is when ethics doesn't scale very well, right? And the way you get ethics embedded at the local level, yeah, you have to do it, but it doesn't necessarily scale. I want to give you an example of an industry that I know very well. I understand the processes that they go through very well. And if you look at how social media companies are now in the eye of the storm because of the way they interact with their clients, it's just really complicated. I mean, the reality is that the world out there and a bunch of the way we interact, especially in social media on the internet, has bias. I mean, it amplifies bias. And social media companies are in the middle of that, in that they need to filter through or help filtering through the worst part of that, which is application of ethics at scale. That's the reason why they have ethics committees, but at the same time, they have very detailed operating procedures at a super detailed, granular level for, almost like a contact center, right? I mean, you know about content moderation. I mean, content moderation works with very detailed operating procedures, and that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Because you have a machine in front that cuts off 95%, depending on the type of social media problem, 95% of the volume. But then you have, by the way, you need to work on that, right? That's the first guarantee that you can scale your ethics, right? You move your ethics into the machine cuts off all the stuff that shouldn't be there. But the rest actually goes into humans. And even if it's 1%, the volume is mind-boggling. I mean, the volume has exploded. So it's really, really hard to then get humans do that last mile of cleaning up. So I'm making it very practical, because at the end of the day, we can talk about ethics at a philosophical level, but the rubber meets the road at the organizational design and the operating design of these things, and managing volumes that are just incredible require a lot of engineering, right? At the end of the day, that's how it gets perceived by society in the end.
Totally. Let's do a little bit of a speed run. I want to clear off some of these questions talking about content management, Gianni. Talk about governance. Let's do a quick round on who owns AI strategy in your organization. Craig.
Yeah, so we actually centralize all AI in an innovations team, and then we just govern that team specifically. So we found that was easier to do. We've a smaller organization than some of these that we've been discussing, so we're able to really focus in that innovations area. It's worked out pretty well for us. And the explainability one, I'm going to reuse that word. We've been calling it transparency, but explainability totally works as well. It's having that visibility in terms of what you're doing. And exposing that to each level of the organization is absolutely key.
Got it. Ricardo, how's the bank do it?
In our case, it has been a process because at the beginning, it was very connected to the innovation team. And by the way, we created a separated company that we call BBVA Data and Analytics to attract talent to that specific type of company, not being really a bank, but a technology company. We also make some acqui-hires of companies in the space and so on. But over time, eventually, like 3-4 years ago, we decided to create a position at the highest level of the organization, reporting to the chairman as the chief data officer. That is the person and the area that is in charge of this portfolio management of everything related to data, working hand by hand with the engineering team, but also with all areas across the organization, because it's a position at the very top, reporting to the chairman, member of the executive committee, but then the team in that area is not a separated team, but is part of the teams that were already existing in engineering, in client solutions, in finance and risk. So it's a mix. in a way to give the relevance to it, but not creating another vertical organization, but something that is more embedded into the teams of the different areas.
Yeah, in our case, given the fact that AI is such an important component of the future of large operations, we have centralized. So we have a chief digital officer, the chief data officer reports into the chief digital officer, and the strategy is really owned by the chief digital officer as well as the CEO. Right? At the end of the day, that's because this is a big part of our roadmap.
Awesome. Okay, I want to go back to the first question that we got in from Steve Patterson in talking about the pandemic and how digital transformation has really hit us all. He says, why are you not disappointed? I'm not sure if he means like with our Zoom lives that we now live, but that there's been very little research on augmenting digital communication, and how do you produce the same results in real life, meaning what is the delta organizational, psychologically, socially, between digital and real life. And so like this is a little bit of a turn. I'll say one thing with the Center for Collective Intelligence, we launched a platform over the summer as we were reacting to the pandemic called Mingler. One of the things that we noticed when people, normally we'd all be in Kresge Auditorium right now, and then we'd go into the lobby and mingle and meet, and you would meet people you didn't know. But how do you do that in this digital world? And so Tom Malone created a platform called Mingler that was sort of trying to simulate that Kresge Auditorium. But I wonder, Craig, Ricardo, Gianni, maybe just a quick speed round on this, on what are the things that you're seeing that have surprised you in sort of digital versus in person. Craig.
Yeah, so we've been researching this for 15 years because we've been running our team remotely long before COVID was a concern. And, you know, bringing people together is absolutely key. We've seen some really innovative uses of the technology that we all have today. So, for example, when we have celebrations in the company, we try and get people together. We're headquartered in Las Vegas. We tend to get together in Las Vegas. Couldn't do that, and so we're doing those virtually. So we had a 15-hour-long party where regions joined in on the hour, and people came in from all the different cultures. We were doing tours of people's houses in Brazil. We had singing and dancing from India. We had, you know, recommendations from the Middle East about cultural celebrations that were going on. You need to be bringing people together, and technology enables that now and really levels the playing field, because, you know, we rely so much on air travel to get around to places, but only so many people can do that. When you've now got this, you know, look at this, look at how we're all collaborating, and it doesn't matter where we are. You need to embrace that, and I think this has pushed everyone to that point where we are. It's the norm, and it's okay if the occasional kid walks by the frame or some other thing happens. That's been accepted as more normal. So I think we've broken through some key barriers.
Gianni, can you beat a 15-hour party?
I mean, it's hard to beat, especially, you know, without 17 beers. But I think the point here is that we were able to rewire organizations in a very different way compared to what we had before. Because before, you know, you're in the office and you mingle with the people in the office, and everybody outside is a little bit of a, you know what happens when 5 people are in a conference room and 17 people are in their own, you know, home, right? I mean, the 5 people become the center of the universe. So I do think that there's a lot that we're learning, but there's actually quite a lot of research out there, apart from what we do at MIT around collective intelligence, which is, you know, really how does the collective at the end of the day feel, right? I mean, how does that behave together? Because there's no cognition without emotion, right? At the end of the day, for those large organizations to function well together, they need to feel, you know, the emotional connection. So, you know, one of the examples is what Craig was talking about. Microsoft has done a lot of work. There's quite a lot of work around network analysis that shows that immediately after the pandemic hit, the connectivity of companies exploded. So people actually connected a lot more than they used to. You know, a lot of the offline conversations became online. But what happens is, and the risk is that the strongest connections, right? The connections that are really functional are the ones that survive and really actually increase exponentially. But what I was talking about before, the weak ties, kind of dwindle, right? So you end up into, tunnel vision. You really want to deliver, and the world is a difficult place right now, and everything else kind of falls off the cliff. And that again is a real danger. I mean, people feel isolated also because they always see the same people, the same places, and it's a little alienating, right? So that certainly has, but we can work through it, and we can devise ways of, bringing back the humanity in the groups.
Good, I agree. Let's bring back the humanity. Ricardo.
Yes, in our case, I would say that the problem and the beauty of it is that we are all different, right? And when you start talking to people, you realize that some people are so glad of been working fully remotely for a year, and they will stay like that forever. And they are very productive, and they do a great job, and they are enjoying their balance they have now because they don't have to commute every day and so on, right? Other people, since the very first day, have been complaining about this. They want to go back as soon as possible because they need to be in the office and have the content. And there are a lot of people in between and so on. So I think first thing for me will be flexibility is needed. There is no single solution for everyone, right? So in the old model in the past, there was a single model, just going to the office and that's it, right? I think now we have opened the discussion. We need to recognize that there is no single model. There may be many different models to play in the same organization according to the nature of the activities of different teams in different areas or countries and so on, right? But our experience has been that for this year, people have been mainly working remotely. It has been not ideal, but it has worked well because people have risen to the challenge. It has been, people have been so proud of the work they have been doing and being able to solve this challenge of attending millions of customers remotely and finding new solutions and so on. So, but obviously that's something that is temporal. You cannot maintain that spirit over a long period of time. So as I said before, now the process of moving to a more hybrid model, in which I believe at least 20-30% of the time you have to be with your teammates physically in person. It can be 1 or 2 days per week, or it can be 1 week every 3 or 4 weeks, or something like that. I think is very much needed because that social interaction is relevant for many different dimensions that Greg and Gianni and you already covered, right? But again, I think the evil is in the details, right? So just to give an example. And a mistake that I've seen in many organizations is that when you start doing this hybrid model, you end up having meetings in which you have people meeting physically at the office and other people connecting from home remotely, right? And that's the worst outcome because then you are dividing people. And those in the meeting room, when they close the Zoom, they start talking between them without the rest, so communication doesn't flow. And so I think for this to work, you need to do a serious methodology of what are going to be the rules and the norms and the processes for this to work. Because if you are always at the office, it's simple. You just come to the office and do your work. And if you are fully remote, it's simple too. But when you mix both, you need to define a model for it. How do you select what types of meetings or ceremonies are going to be in person versus what are remote? What's the frequency of it? How do you coordinate teams interaction? Because for a single team, a Scrum team, 8-10 people, they just can agree, okay, we are going to be together for the sprint planning and the synchros and 1 day per week and so on. But then that team is have dependencies with other teams, and then you need to start to coordinate among them, and then it becomes complex. But that's the beauty of it. It's like the Agile methodology. People, when they start looking at it, think this is chaotic, and it's the opposite. It's a very strict methodology of how you do things, what are the ceremonies, giving a lot of freedom and power to the teams, but it has a lot of methodology. And I think that same approach has to be taken to this. It's not, and the problem I think is that people typically, we have very strong views about it, right? And we want to have our view that we have to go back to the office, or no, we have to defend people interest on being remotely. I think we have to get rid of this a more, theoretical discussion and personal views, and being more practical and methodological about how to solve this problem.
Okay, let's continue on sort of this human discussion, but bring it to AI. And we've got a question here from Rubens. How do you handle the potential anxiety and concern that AI might cause to employees who feel threatened when it comes to automation? And will AI and machine learning augment parts of the workforce, but threaten other positions? Let's talk a little bit about that. Like, is this a major concern, and how are your companies dealing with it?
I'll go on that one. I think it is a major concern. I mean, people are worried about them being replaced with a machine. But combined with that is change. And change in all IT projects is always, a major factor here. I think that the transparency that was spoken of before is absolutely key for that. What will we use? How will we use it? How are we planning to use it? And being open at all stages. And then showing people, bringing them along for the journey. Some will always be skeptical, but as long as you've got the majority where you're bringing them along and they're understanding actually this is for the benefit of the efficiency of the business, this allows us to do more, allows us to scale more, allows us to reach more people, allows us to have a deeper interaction in the end, then you can get people there. But it's absolutely change. You have to bear that in mind from the very beginning of the project. Essential for every single project success is that change management.
Probably, I'll say, first of all, it is a real, I wouldn't call it a concern, but it's a certainty that AI-based automation and, work simplification and streamlining is going to impact a large amount of jobs, especially the white-collar jobs of the future. And the more those jobs obviously are rote, repetitive, rule-based, etc., the more there's going to be a bunch of that. Now, there are two ways of especially in our company, 100,000 people, actually quite a few of them potentially could be in scope for that kind of things in the future. We are approaching at two levels. One is, making part of the future by giving them the ability to be part of the design of the new work of the future, right? And the new flow of work. Again, back to that front, middle, and back office, everybody can actually contribute in working with the colleagues in another department, say again, the order management example. So people actually work together, agile teams, they design things together, and then they move on. Because we'll never run out of opportunities to make the business better. That is actually a certainty. So people can actually get there, and if you give them a chance to participate in, then the anxiety would reduce. The other thing to do is to reskill them. The reskilling, though, needs to start from where those people are. Meaning that not all of those people will become programmers, coders, or data scientists. But what we try to do, at least in our company, is to create what we call T-shape skills. A T-shape is, instead of an I shape, which is very narrow but can go very deep, say a Python data scientist, a T-shaped person could be an underwriting person who has a little bit of this flat stem of the T that goes into a little bit of Python, a little bit of Agile, a little bit of design thinking, etc. And these people are super helpful because they can interoperate, again, collective intelligence, with other people, with the design thinkers, with the Lean Six Sigma people, with the coders, so that they can actually build and then operate processes of the future. So the reskilling component, I think, is a massive part of the reduction of the anxiety. And frankly, it's one of the areas where we need to spend most in the near future, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely with Gianni on this point on reskilling. But I would say that since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, this has happened many times, right? We have seen technology disrupting businesses and industries many times across the last centuries. And I think the question is, at the macro level, the history can show us that the result is good, right? Jobs disappear, but new jobs are created because new opportunities, new business models emerge, new activities are there. So at the macro level, I think this is very easily solved, right? The problem is at the micro level of people and individuals. And I think the difference this time to previous technological disruptions in the past is the velocity of it, right? Because in the Industrial Revolution and other disruptions over the last century, the time has been a bit slower, and people have been able to adapt more easily and to re-skill more easily because they have time for it. Now this is accelerating. This is accelerating at relevant speed. So people have less and less time to do this adaptation and this re-skilling and upskilling and so on. So I think the role for companies, for organizations, is to invest in re-skilling, as Gianni was mentioning. I think it has to be a culture of learning, mainly, because you don't really know what is going to be relevant in 5 years, right? A typical example is whether you need to learn to code. Well, maybe not. Maybe in 5 years, the no-code trend is across everywhere, and you don't really need to code, but you need other skills, right? So it's very difficult to anticipate what is going to make the disruption in 5, 10 years. But what is very clear is that you're going to need people who are able to continuously learn, the learning of learning, right? And that's very much a culture, because everyone agrees on the importance of learning, and every CEO will talk about that and so on. But then in reality, how much time are you giving to your employees, to your people, to do learning, to invest time in learning? Is it something meaningful? How much money are you investing into it? Those are the key questions to answer, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree. And actually, that was one of the reasons that I was so interested in joining the MIT Horizon project and leading that, because I think that it's really important to have continuous learning, to have tools that help to do that in an asynchronous way. Different learners can learn at different paces and such. We are coming to a close on this fantastic conversation. We've got I think we covered a lot of these questions. There were some that were very specific that we didn't have time to get to. What I want to do is we're going to do a final speed round where panelists, we're going to imagine that we're here in 5 years. And the 4 of us are back together again after probably many 15-hour parties. And we are going to, who knows if we'll be in person or digital or avatars. What are we going to be talking about then? Let's see, Craig, why don't you go first?
All right. Well, I'm hoping we'll be talking about all the positives that came from some very tough years, from a short period that was very tough. So many positives that came from it. I hope that it'll be in person because I really love the energy of a live audience. But I also hope that we have not forgotten and that we don't forget the lessons we've learned here, which is we can really open up the platform, all platforms, by making this more accessible. This content can be consumed by many countries, different levels of economic advantage or disadvantage, and we've enabled that now through a lot of this technology. And I think AI is really an enabler in a very similar way. It can enable a lot of people who can get on board. There's some questions in the chat about how do we enable more people getting into this. This is absolutely accessible. It's a lot of resources people can pick up and have this as their skill, and it can really help with upward mobility. So I hope those things come together, and look forward to regrouping, and we'll raise a drink together in 5 years' time. Sounds great. Craig,
thank you. Gianni?
I think in 5 years is actually a good time, especially after everything we've gone through. I think we will talk about the design of superminds. Right? A supermind is basically a network of people augmented by machines. What can that do? Right? And that's an organizational design kind of discussion. We still rely very heavily on hierarchical structures with workflows that are very deterministic. With the advent of digital technologies, and especially the ability of AI to really curate content, connect people who are supposed to be connected, help them collaborate like we're doing now, we can actually do very different designs of organizations that are much more functional to attack the challenges that we have. So my money is totally that we will be talking about designing superminds in 5 years down the line.
Couldn't agree more. Supermindsdesign.com. It will launch soon. All right. And Ricardo, in 5 years, you're going to have some serious research under your belt. So what are you going to be talking about?
Yeah. Well, very much in line with Gianni on this, because it's quite interesting to see how still today, after so many years of digital transformation and talking about transformation, culture, leadership, organizational transformation, and so on, when you look around, still most organizations across countries are still very much the same as they have been for decades. Basically hierarchical and based on functional segmentation, right? And those two elements of functional segmentation, specialization of work, and hierarchy, again, they come back from the Industrial Revolution. So it's time to rethink that seriously, right? I think we have an opportunity now to start really playing with new organizational designs, like superminds, like decentralized organizations, like teal organizations, and so on. And I really believe on the power of it, because this is at the end the way to follow, to have more human organizations that are truly able to leverage the potential of everyone, right? And I think there is so much value to capture from that is worth exploring it, right? And we didn't discuss today about blockchain and crypto networks and so on, but I think that's a space of technology that is going to give us new tools to play with it, right? Because how do you coordinate consensus or incentives in large networks of individuals is a tough problem. But today we have tools to play with it. So I think it's going to be a very interesting period of time in this space.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for this awesome conversation. It was super fun, and I hope to see you in less than 5 years. And Alan, thank you to you and your team for running such a wonderful event. And Alan, back to you.
Well, thank you to everyone, Kathleen, Craig, Gianni, and Ricardo, for a very dynamic discussion. For everyone in the audience, please join us tomorrow at 10:30. Irving Vladowski-Berger and I will lead an open discussion about this week's panels and the theme, the future of work. Don't forget to come back next Tuesday, April 20th at 10:30 for episode 3. Carrie Perlson will be leading a discussion about protecting your digital innovations from cyber attack. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And yes, replays will be posted in the 2021 Symposium program agenda. Bye for now.